Okay, good morning, everybody. So this is our last review session for Unit 2. Last time in class, I kind of just talked through material from the French and Indian War all the way through Washington, I think. Is that right? So I think I'm going to just kind of go through Adams and Jefferson and Madison, go through those presidencies quick, just remind ourselves what those are or what happened during those presidencies. And then with whatever's time is left, we'll rewind, go back to French Indian War, and work that way. Unless anyone has any questions, like talk about this for a second, talk about that for a second. That's really important. Anyone got anything really big that they want to talk about? 5, 6, 7. No big questions from anyone? Okay. Okay. Well, let's get with Adams' presidency, everyone. There's only a couple things that we need to talk about. This is in chapter 7. So a couple things. One is the XYZ affair. Remember, this is when both the French and the British are stopping our ships, kidnapping our sailors. We want to make them stop. So we've already tried to negotiate this with Great Britain. That didn't work under Jay's Treaty. So now under Adams' presidency, we're trying to do this with the French. We go send our negotiators there to France, but then what happens? We couldn't meet with the French negotiator because these 3 mystery men, X, Y, and Z, demanded a bribe, and we said we wouldn't pay it. So this makes Federalists upset at the French, makes Federalists like Hamilton want to go to war with France. They demanded a bribe so the Americans could negotiate with French. So what we see here is whenever there is a problem with the French or the British, we always start wanting to go to war with them, depending on who's the president. At this point, Adams was a Federalist, so we're going to get mad at the French whenever they do something wrong. Okay. And then to respond to this, the Federalists are going to pass anti-French, anti-immigrant, anti-democratic Republican laws. The big ones are the Alien Act. Alien Act made it easier for the government to deport foreigners. And the Sedition Act allowed the government to put journalists in jail if they criticized politicians personally. Okay. That's the Alien and Sedition Acts. Yeah, Sedition Act. The government could imprison a journalist if they criticized a politician. And so Democratic Republicans hate these laws because they're specifically targeting them. They know that. And so what they try to do is they try to nullify this law, basically saying that this law is no good by passing a series of resolutions in their own states. We saw this with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, where they said states can declare national laws as unjust or unconstitutional. That states are able to judge the constitutionality of laws. But that's not true. That's not what the Constitution says. There's only one government group or agency or branch that can do that. Who judges constitutionality of laws? Supreme Court, right? The judicial branch. So states are not part of this at all. Okay. Jefferson. So we have the election of 1800. Why is this election so significant? Yeah, first peaceful transfer of power between opposing political parties, right? First time where one political party loses to another one and has to give up the presidency. Okay. Now, with the election of 1800, Jefferson is going to call this a revolution, just showing that, I mean, this is one of the first times in world history that we see something like this. But to maintain or keep some power, Federalists used the power of the presidency to try to gain power in the judicial branch. Remember, there's a gap between when the president is elected and when they actually become president. At this time, it's really long, it's from like November to March. So within that time, Adams goes and nominates a bunch of midnight judges. So these are judges appointed at the last minute of Adams' presidency so that they would be in these federal judge positions for many, many years, even after the Federalists lose the presidency. And we remember now that the Federalists never get another president. So this is their way of getting an impact even after they know they've lost power. However, one judge did not get his position filled, and he would actually end up suing. This is Marbury versus Madison. Now, the actual facts behind the case are not very important for us in this class. For us, what we need to know is that this is the first time where the Supreme Court ruled a law unconstitutional. Jefferson would continue on with his presidency. Remember, he's a Democratic Republican. He would buy the Louisiana Purchase, even though he has a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Remember, that means he believes that the president can only do what the Constitution says he can do. But the Constitution doesn't say the president can buy land, so he just kind of did it anyway. He kind of revised his opinion about the presidential powers granted by the Constitution so that he could do what he wanted. Okay. That's Louisiana Purchase. And then we have Madison's presidency. So the big thing that's building throughout all this time is this war with Great Britain. Warhawks wanted to start the war because of two reasons. Oh, Warhawks is just a phrase we use for people who want to fight a war. Yeah. Okay. There's Doves and Warhawk. So British in the West, they're even helping Native Americans there to fight against the Americans. Then the seizure. Seizure means you're taking something, you're seizing something. Seizure of American ships. Okay, so those are two main reasons why Warhawks want to go to war. Typically, the Democratic Republicans want to fight. the Federalists up in New England do not want to fight. In fact, the Federalists are so against the War of 1812, they get together at the Hartford Convention and talk about all the things they want to get done, all the things that they think are problems in the national government, things like a president should not be from the same state from one election to another election, or there should be a higher vote threshold in order to go to war. So all these things they want to change, which none of it happens, and it's just a signal that the Federalist Party is dead or dying. The war will last for about 3 years until the Americans and British signed the Treaty of Ghent. At this point, the British are just sick of the war. They did. We don't need to know that for the test, though. The British are sick of the war. They're ready to end it. So they signed the Treaty of Ghent. But remember, so remember, the word doesn't get to the Americas instantaneously. Instead, that we have the biggest battle of the war, or one of the most important, is the Battle of New Orleans. It does two things. It creates a lot of national pride.
Wait, so this was after the treaty was signed, but
Yep.
they just hadn't gotten it
Yep. National pride. And Andrew Jackson becomes a hero. And then we had just a couple pages on Monroe. The only thing we need to know about Monroe's presidency right now is the Nice Treaty. Florida went to the U.S. Spain gave Florida to the U.S. For parts of Texas, yeah. Yep. This is the big thing in the United States received Florida from Spain. Okay. Any questions about all of this before I return to chapter 5? For this test, there are 60 total questions. 25 of those are document-based questions. Okay. 25 of the 60 are multiple.
Oh. The same as last time, right?
About, there's a little bit, I think there's one more document. Okay, so let's go back. French and Indian War. War's over. French are kicked out of North America. The British are having some problems with Americans going over the Appalachian Mountains, and so they passed the proclamation of 1763. So colonists can't move across the Appalachian Mountains. This causes the relationship to change. Oh, that could have been good evidence for an essay last week if you were about that. More colonists are upset by this. Also, Remember, wars are expensive, and so they're going to pass laws like the Stamp Act of 1765. This is a way to raise funds to pay off British debt. Right? You have to buy these stamps that you put on legal documents and newspapers and books and all that. We'll see, because of the need to guard the proclamation of 1763, more British soldiers will be required in the colonies. So they'll send a bunch of people over and they'll need a place to live, which leads us to the Quartering Act. Where the word quartering is talking about housing people. And so in this, colonial governments like colonies had to pay for housing or buildings being built for British soldiers. It's a stamp you had to pay to for a stamp on a document. This would not be the only tax that would be issued, though. You also see the Townshend Acts, where they tax things like paper, paint, glass, and tea. You're taxing all these things. So what did the colonists do in response to the Townshend Act with all these taxes? They boycott it, right? Because it's putting these taxes on these British goods. And so things get more expensive. So fine, you know what? We're not going to buy your stuff. Either we're going to make it ourselves or we're going to smuggle it in from another country. This is boycotting. All of these stuff. Yeah, all these goods. Mostly the boycott is done in places like Boston. Okay. Sons of Liberty pushed for this. Different leaders up there did. This is when we see more violent responses to, like tar and feathering or burning people in effigy. And so that led to increased presence in places like Boston, which eventually led to the unfortunate Boston Massacre. So this is all just raising tension, right? Between the colonists, between the British soldiers, and eventually with the Boston Massacre, Parliament gets rid of the tax on paper, paint, and glass, but not on tea, right? They keep the tax on tea. In fact, they issue a new Tea Act, and what does that lead to? Boston Tea Party. They're refusing to buy tea from the British sponsored East India Trading Company. Yeah, and so remember the idea was that they were trying to basically create a monopoly so that they would only trade with them. The British or the colonists were like, no, we want to be able to have choice and pay for tea, however. And if that means smuggling it. So in response to this, the Parliament passes the Coercive Acts or the Intolerable Acts. This is things like closing Boston Harbor. They stopped town meetings. And so all this is eventually leading to the conflict that we see coming, right? The shot heard around, hold on, I just want to make sure I get through as much as I can. So, the shot heard around the world happens at Lexington and Concord. And we're not turning back now. You have a question?
Yeah, so OS specs basically like, the press, like, press feet basically.
Part of it, yep. And colonists didn't like that. That's what leads to the First Continental Congress. They're talking about how to get our rights back. And that's about it. Doesn't last long. Not even all the colonies attend the First Continental Congress. Selection in Concord. Now we're starting this fighting. Initially, it's mostly just Massachusetts versus the British. And eventually the Second Continental Congress meets. And they say, you know, this should not be just Massachusetts versus Great Britain. We will join them. The idea is to fight for rights. At this point, it is not for independence. You fight to basically force Parliament to give you rights. They send an olive branch petition, remember, asking, hey, we want peace, we want loyalty, just give us our rights back. The king doesn't respond to that very well. And at the beginning of 1776, the famous book Common Sense is issued, arguing for independence. Around that same time is when the Congress finds out the king's response to the olive branch petition, that basically all of them are traitors and treasonous. And so basically it's going to push them to independence. And they do that with the Declaration of Independence. War started. Remember, we don't need to know very many battles at all. All we've done so far is Lexington and Concord. Battle of Saratoga. This leads to a French alliance. Because they need support, they need help from people like the French. They're trying to pay for all this stuff and it's not working well, right? They paid, or they're trying to start their own paper currency. So you have not only a war that's always, wars are always expensive, but also you're trying to start your economy from scratch. All of this leads to super high inflation to the point where their paper currency is basically worth nothing. They will pass the Treaty of Paris after the Battle of Yorktown. Does a couple things. The United States gives land to the Mississippi River. They get fishing rights off the coast of Canada, and they get their independence. Yep. Questions about pre-Revolutionary War, Revolutionary War? Okay. Last thing we're going to talk about is Articles of Federation, Constitution. Ready? Okay, so they set up a new form of government under the Articles of Confederation. We have strong states, weak national governments. Okay. The one real positive thing that the Northwest Ordinance or the Articles do is called the Northwest Ordinance. Remember that created the Northwest Territory. It prohibited slavery. And it created a process for a territory to become a state.
Just in the north.
Northwest Territory, yeah. Under the Articles of Confederation, we had a rebellion called Shays' Rebellion. Remember, there was no president to stop it, so they just got lucky because Daniel Shays dies, and they realize, okay, we need a new government, and so they get together and create a constitution. They're going to create a great compromise, and the great compromise is all about power and representation. The more representation you and your state has in Congress, the more power you have. And so small states prefer the Senate, where they have equal representation. The House of Representatives is based on population. So this is called a bicameral, bi meaning two. So we have a two-house system together creating Congress. But then the question is, okay, well, when you're counting population, we count women, even though they don't have political votes or political power. We count children, even though they don't have political power. But what about people who are enslaved? They decided under the 3/5 compromise to count the population of enslaved people as 3/5 of its actual total number, and that would be a penalty towards those southern states, so that those southern states have less power. So this new constitution is going to give a lot more power over the national government. They can do things like tax. They couldn't do that before. They're in charge of the military, which is actually something that stayed the same. It's something you could have written about in your essay last week. And they're in control of commerce now. Interstate commerce. So that's anything that is being sold from one state to another state. That was one big problem with the articles, is that there was nothing controlling state to state transactions. You just kind of hoped that the states would do the right thing, which is not realistic. But to get the Constitution passed, you need to get 3/4 of the states to agree to it. Does anyone remember what the method was to convince states to support it? The Federalist Papers. These are anonymous articles written in newspapers around the country, but specifically in like New York, trying to get people to support the Constitution. Okay, we're going to end there for today, everybody.